of out-of-state vendors doing the same thing that Main Street vendors do, that very soon we'll eliminate these subsidies, close this loophole, and I congratulate them for their years of work in this area. I'm happy to join 10 senators, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats in co-sponsoring this legislation.
For a moment. Would the senator yield for a moment?
Oh, yes.
I'd like to go on the record, I'm sure, on behalf of myself and Senator Enzi, and say that Senator Alexander doesn't give himself enough credit. He's been an integral part of our effort to put together this bipartisan bill. We wouldn't be here without him. I want to thank him for facilitating the bipartisan effort to put this bill together, and I share his feelings. I think we've finally found that sweet spot, and we can pass this bill. Thank you.
I thank the senator from Illinois, and I wonder if I might ask consent to include in the record, following my remarks, the letter, the article by Al Cardenas, the head of the American Conservative Union, the essay by William F. Buckley, and a letter from Governor Bill Haslam of Tennessee endorsing the Enzi-Durbin legislation.
Without objection, it will be included.
We yield the floor.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Turn to morning business.
The Senate is in morning business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me also commend Senator Enzi and Senator Durbin and Senator Alexander, because I, too, am a co-sponsor of this legislation. And I think it does represent a remarkably thoughtful and bipartisan approach to the problem of providing resources to local states and communities so they can carry out the very challenging issues of local government. And I'm not surprised that Senator Alexander would be a key element in this product. But both Senator Enzi and Senator Durbin deserve to be complimented. Thank you for your leadership, gentlemen. But I rise specifically to speak in strong support of the Vow to Hire Heroes Act of 2011. This legislation incorporates key components of the America's Jobs Act and other bipartisan proposals designed to help veterans find jobs, including the Hiring Heroes Act, and I'm a proud co-sponsor of this legislation also. These are common sense policies that Congress can and should pass immediately. We are in the midst of an unemployment crisis that is obvious to every American, and it is a growing problem that is sapping not only our economic strength, but indeed our sense of national purpose and our morale. The national unemployment rate has been hovering around 9%, and that means 14 million Americans are looking for work in one of the toughest economies since the Great Depression. But what is unfortunate, some might even say shameful, is that almost 1 million of those Americans looking for work are veterans returning home after valiantly serving our country. The unemployment rate for veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq is an undefensible 12.1%. It represents a significant blow to young men and women who are returning home after serving their country in very difficult circumstances. In 2010, 36% of the Afghanistan and Iraq-era veterans were unemployed for longer than 26 weeks. Again, that is a shameful statistic. And this unfortunate trend is mirrored in my home state of Rhode Island. We have a very high unemployment rate, 10.5%, one of the highest in the nation. And we have been, unfortunately, in that category for almost 2 years now. But for veterans, the rate is 11.1%. They're even doing worse than other non-veterans in the employment market. And that's one more reason, by the way, that we should extend the unemployment compensation legislation that's so necessary. I've joined Senator Durbin, White House, Levin, Merkley, and Gillibrand, and we've proposed to do this with the Emergency Unemployment Compensation Extension Act of 2011. We still have people coming back from Afghanistan. We still have people who are holding onto a job but very well might lose it and need these benefits. And if we do not pass this legislation, then beginning next January, there's a real possibility that they could not be able to get these benefits, which are so essential. We have to work together. I think it's a very good example of the work that Senator Enzi and Senator Alexander and Senator Durbin and myself and others have done with respect to this legislation on sales tax. But we have to work across the aisles, particularly for our Americans and American veterans, but also for American workers throughout this country. Again, today we have a component of the Americans Job Act before us. This bill is focused on veterans, but the Job Act overall should be passed, and we've argued for it endlessly, because it will put Americans to work, it is fully paid for, and it will be an investment in infrastructure and in other programs that are long-term needs of this nation. Now, this particular legislation before us, targeted at veterans, would provide incentives for businesses to hire these veterans, including a tax credit of $2,400 for hiring a veteran who has been unemployed for more than 4 weeks but less than 6 months, a $5,600 tax credit for hiring a veteran who's been looking for a job more than 6 months, and a $9,600 tax credit for hiring veterans with service-connected disabilities who've been looking for a job for more than 6 months. These incentives will help veterans secure employment, and they should be passed immediately. These veterans deserve our help as they transition from their military service to their civilian careers. They have incredible skills of leadership, of diligence, of dedication, of self-discipline that add to their technical skills and make them incredibly important for the growth of our economy. And they have to have the opportunity to use these skills for the benefit of their communities, as they did to defend their country. This legislation provides the critical assistance. It has other aspects, too. At first, it would provide opportunities for military personnel who are leaving active service for transitional assistance to be in a workshop sponsored by the Department of Defense, the Department of Labor, and the Veterans Affairs that will help them write resumes and do career counseling and do other things. And second, it expands education and training opportunities for older unemployed veterans by essentially providing an additional year of Montgomery GI Bill benefits at community colleges or technical schools. And it also allows service members to begin to seek civilian jobs in the federal government prior to formally separating from the military service. Now, earlier this week, I was with the President. We announced these initiatives and more. And after that visit to the Rose Garden, I went up to Walter Reed Military Hospital Center at Bethesda to visit those young men and women who have served and now who are wounded warriors. And trust me, their spirit is undeterred, their commitment to the country. We owe them much more than we can ever repay. And the first payment in that huge debt is passing immediately this week this legislation to help our veterans. So as we celebrate Veterans Day with speeches, we'll have a real accomplishment to bring to the American people and the veterans who serve and defend us today. Thank you. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator from West Virginia, sir.
I ask unanimous consent that David Goldman, who was a detailee from the Federal Communications Commission to the Commerce Committee, be given floor privileges during the debate on Senate Resolution, Joint Resolution 6.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader is recognized.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection,
Mr. President, I move to proceed to S.J. Res. 6.
morning business is closed. Under the previous order, there will be 4 hours of debate equally divided and controlled between the two leaders and their designees.
Mr. President,
The Senator from West Virginia.
I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today's debate concerns the Senate Joint Resolution number 6. In a larger context, though, we really have been having this debate for 34 months. And the theme is that the Obama administration's relentless imposition of new and destructive regulations have really not helped us get into a recovery and, in fact, I think are freezing our economy. We've seen it with the Environmental Protection Agency when it tried to regulate carbon emissions and greenhouse gases using the Clean Air Act, a purpose for which Congress never intended the law to be used. We've seen it with the National Mediation Board when it overturned nearly a century of precedent and issued a new rulemaking to allow unions to be formed more easily but harder to decertify. We've seen it with the National Labor Relations Board when it took the shocking step of challenging Boeing's decision to create new jobs by building a new factory in South Carolina simply because South Carolina is a right-to-work state. Today's issue involves bureaucratic overreach into a symbol of American innovation and creativity, the Internet, because the Federal Communications Commission has now decided to regulate the Internet. Last December, 3 FCC commissioners on a party line voted to impose rules that restrict how Internet service providers offer broadband services to consumers. These rules, known as net neutrality, impose 19th century-style monopoly regulations on the most competitive and important job-creating engine of the 21st century, the Internet. This marks a stunning reversal from a hands-off approach to the Internet that federal policymakers have taken for more than a decade. During the last 20 years, the Internet has grown and flourished without burdensome regulations imposed by Washington. Powered by the strength of free market forces, the Internet has been an open platform for innovation, spurring business development, and much-needed job creation. The former Democratic FCC Chairman William Kennard stated in 1999, "The fertile fields of innovation across the communications sector and around the country are blooming because from the get-go we have taken a deregulatory, competitive approach to our communications structure, especially the Internet." Now, the present FCC is reversing that policy that has been successful beyond our expectations. Broadband Internet networks have powered the information and communications industries, which in 2009 accounted for more than 3.5 million high-paying jobs and about $1 trillion in economic activity. This industry has been an engine for major economic growth even during these difficult times. Yet, the FCC's rules could severely jeopardize this industry's vast potential. Net neutrality is intended to limit how Internet service providers develop and operate their broadband networks. The net neutrality order allows the FCC to tell broadband providers what kind of business practices are reasonable and unreasonable. The FCC, however, did not bother to clearly define in its rules what the agency considers to be reasonable. This point is vital to understand. With such an arbitrary and yet poorly defined standard, companies will be forced to err on the side of caution. Rather than risk possible punishment from the FCC, many companies will simply decide, maybe we won't invest right now in new technologies. Maybe it's too risky to develop and deploy new services. At the very least, it will delay such investment. This kind of regulatory uncertainty will be crippling for companies and particularly small providers. We have heard exactly that from a small wireless Internet provider in Wyoming called Lariat. This is a provider that is serving remote areas and trying to expand to other unserved areas. Lariat testified before Congress that these FCC regulations are already harming its ability to attract investors, grow its business, hire more workers, and serve new customers. Forcing broadband companies to ask the government for permission before moving forward is exactly what we should try to avoid when reviving our economy. This FCC regime will lead to stagnation in Internet innovation in the United States, placing us at a disadvantage against overseas competitors who are not burdened with similar rules. Moreover, Internet providers will end up spending resources on lawyers and lobbyists in order to comply with the FCC's rules rather than investing those dollars in innovation. Small companies will find it even more expensive to navigate Washington, D.C. This certainly won't help consumers, particularly in rural areas, and will only increase the costs they have to bear. Before any new regulations are forced on American businesses, it's the government's responsibility to clearly show, one, there's an actual problem that needs to be addressed. That should be foremost. With the FCC taking such a large departure from the agency's previous light-touch approach, one might think the FCC could point to a long list of net neutrality violations and problems that need to be fixed. That is not the case here. In a 134-page regulatory order, the FCC spent only 3 paragraphs attempting to catalog alleged instances of misconduct. And within those 3 short paragraphs, every alleged problem was addressed under the FCC's existing rules. Or, if not, it was fixed by the provider under pressure from the public or the competitive marketplace, where it should be fixed. As former FCC Commissioner Meredith Baker noted in her statement dissenting from the FCC's net neutrality order, the Commission, she said, was unable to identify a single ongoing practice of a single broadband provider that it finds problematic upon which to base this action. To put it simply, the FCC has issued new rules without even demonstrating that intervention is actually necessary. Despite protests to the contrary, these net neutrality regulations on broadband providers clearly establish the FCC as the Internet's gatekeeper, a role for which the government is not suited. Innovation does not work on a government timetable, nor does it thrive through a maze of roadblocks. Ironically, supporters of net neutrality insist that providers are the ones who may become gatekeepers of the Internet. These people say the openness of the Internet is far too important to be left unprotected by the government. This is a false premise. In fact, the Internet has been an open platform for innovation since its inception, and it has not needed any sort of net neutrality rules from bureaucrats at the FCC. And to make matters worse, Congress has never given the FCC the explicit authority to regulate how Internet providers manage their networks. That's why the new rules represent an unprecedented power grab by the unelected commissioners at the FCC. In fact, current law states, and I quote, "It is the policy of the United States to preserve the vibrant and competitive free market that presently exists for the Internet and other interactive computer services, unfettered by federal or state regulation." That's the law today. The FCC has lost this fight already in the courts. Last year, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals struck down the FCC's 2008 attempt to impose net neutrality in the Comcast versus FCC case. The court ruled that the FCC was acting beyond the reach of its congressionally provided authority and cautioned that regulations should be imposed only with explicit congressional delegation. This was validation that regulatory agencies cannot make policy without congressional direction. Rather than back down, however, the FCC doubled down. The current FCC order tries an even more expansive interpretation of the law than was used in the Comcast case. FCC commissioners inexplicably claim the agency can impose heavy-handed Internet regulations under Section 706 of the Telecommunications Act. This was a section of the law that was intended to remove regulatory barriers to broadband investment, not to raise them. If the FCC's legal theory is left unchallenged, the FCC will have nearly unbounded authority to regulate almost anything on the Internet. It is Congress's role, not the FCC's, to determine the proper policy framework for the Internet. Over time, and aided by the current administration, regulators throughout the government have gradually tried to seize increasing control over so many facets of American life. It is time for the Senate to stop this overreach. We write the laws of this country, not unelected bureaucrats. That's why we're here today. Thanks to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, former Senator Don Nichols, and the late Senator Ted Stevens, one of the tools Congress has to stop rogue agencies is the Congressional Review Act. The Congressional Review Act allows Congress to review a rule before it takes effect, and even to nullify that rule if Congress finds that it is inappropriate, or if it overreaches, or if Congress itself hasn't delegated this power to an agency. As Senators Reid, Nichols, and Stevens said at the time of this bill's passage, congressional review gives the public the opportunity to call the attention of politically accountable elected officials to concerns about new agency rules. If these concerns are sufficiently serious, Congress can stop the rule. We believe the concerns about the FCC's net neutrality rules are sufficiently serious to warrant the consideration of Senate Joint Resolution 6, the disapproval resolution Senator McConnell and I introduced to nullify the FCC's net neutrality order under the Congressional Review Act. The House has already passed its version of the resolution. We need only a majority of senators to send this bill to the President's desk. Even a net neutrality supporter, Senator Olympia Snowe, who has authored net neutrality legislation, is a co-sponsor and supporter of our resolution today. While Senator Snowe and I don't agree on the need for a net neutrality law, we are in complete agreement, and she stated beautifully that Congress, not the FCC, should determine what the proper regulatory framework is for the Internet. If the Senate does not strike down these regulations soon, they will go into effect on November 20th, further jeopardizing jobs in this fragile economy. I guess you could say that it will allow more lawyers to be hired, but more innovators, probably not. That is not the mix we need to assure that our economy will get back on track in this country. Studies indicate that net neutrality rules could significantly affect our economy. If net neutrality reduces capital investment in broadband infrastructure by even 10%, it could cost our country hundreds of thousands of jobs over the next decade. We must preserve the openness of the Internet as a platform for innovation and economic growth. We must keep the competitive advantage that we have in this country for innovation. The last thing we ought to be doing is put restrictions on our providers when many countries who are also advanced in this area are not doing the same thing. So when we go to global competitiveness, we are putting our companies at a disadvantage. Why would we do that? We must stop the job-killing regulatory interference by our government today in so many areas, and we can start right here, right now, by keeping the Internet free, voting for this resolution of disapproval, and saying to the regulatory bodies in this town, Congress must authorize a delegation of authority for your agency to pass rules, and especially when Congress is in disagreement with those rules. This is a key policy decision for our body. We need to step up for the responsibility that Congress has. You know, our Constitution divided the powers between three branches of government. If Congress doesn't stand up for its one-third of the powers of this government and lets unelected bureaucrats run over our prerogatives, we will become a weaker branch and our government will become weaker for it. We need to have three equal branches of government, and that means each branch of government must fulfill its responsibilities under the Constitution. Congress must delegate its authority explicitly for a rule to be made. That is the way the Constitution intended for Congress to fulfill its job as the elected representatives of the people of our country. The House has passed this resolution. I hope the Senate will tomorrow. I hope the people will speak and say, even if you disagree on the basic issue of net neutrality, that it is not the right of the FCC to pass such sweeping regulations that will affect the economy of this country without explicit authority from Congress, which it does not have. Thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to just ask my colleagues to come to the floor if they want to speak on this amendment, on this resolution. There are 4 hours equally divided, and that time is now running. So I would say to my Republican colleagues, we have quite a list of those who want to speak. They must know that the time will run out in about 3.5 hours now. So I ask them to contact me if they wish to speak. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
The senior senator from the great state of West Virginia.
Mr. President, I rise today to oppose the Senate Joint Resolution number 6, a resolution brought under the Congressional Review Act, about which I'd like to talk, to disapprove the Federal Communications FCC's open Internet rules, such as they are. Americans want the Internet to be free and open to them. They want to go where they want to go. They want to see what they want to see. They want to do what they want to do on the Internet. They don't want to have somebody blocking them. They don't want to have gatekeepers. They want it to be a nice open forum for them. And they care about the Internet. Everybody uses the Internet. They want to be able to develop new businesses. They want to read. They want to watch video. They want to reach out to friends and family and community, and they want to do it online. And they want to do all of these things on the Internet without having to ask permission from their broadband provider. The FCC has promulgated balanced rules that let Americans do all of these things and keep the Internet open and which keep the Internet free. So let us be clear from the outset. no matter how S.J. Res. 6 is dressed up in language that suggests it will promote openness and freedom, it will not do that. It will not do that. The resolution is misguided. It will add uncertainty, in fact, into the economy. It will hinder small businesses dependent on fair broadband access, or otherwise they might be put in a slower lane. They don't want to be in a slower lane. They want to be in a fast lane. They want to be able to compete with other parts of the country. It will, in fact, undermine innovation, this resolution. It will hamper investment in digital commerce. And it will imperil the openness and freedom that has been the hallmark of the Internet from the very start. The FCC's rules were a product of very hard work and consensus and compromise. The agency had extensive input from stakeholders from all quarters, and they just opened up and said, you know, send in your comments. In fact, they had written input from more than 100,000 commentators. About 90% of those filing supported, who did that, supported adoption of open Internet rules. Open Internet rules. On top of this, the rules are based on long-standing and widely accepted open Internet principles, which were first articulated during the Bush administration, the second Bush administration. These rules do three basic things, Mr. President. First, they impose a transparency obligation on providers of broadband Internet service. This means that all broadband providers are required to publicly disclose to consumers accurate information regarding the network management practices. Second, the rules prohibit fixed broadband providers from blocking lawful content, from blocking applications and services and devices. This means consumers and innovators will continue to have the right to send and receive lawful Internet traffic, with mobile broadband service providers subjected to a more limited set of prohibitions, and I'll speak about that in a moment. Third, the rules aim to ensure that the Internet remains a level playing field by prohibiting fixed broadband providers from unreasonably discriminating in transmitting lawful network traffic, which they have done. Finally, the rules are meant to apply with the complementary principle of reasonable network management, which provides broadband providers the flexibility to address congestion or traffic that is harmful to the network. These are the principles I believe everyone can support. I see nothing wrong with them. The word reasonable somehow doesn't scare me. Maybe it should, but it just doesn't. So I asked my colleagues, what's wrong with transparency? What's wrong with that? Why would we want to promote Internet blocking or discrimination? Why would we want to have some people on a fast lane, some people on a slow lane, depending upon whether you paid your Internet provider or not enough money? What is unreasonable about reasonable network management? I believe the FCC's effort, along with the ongoing oversight and enforcement, will protect consumers, and I believe it will provide companies with the certainty that they need to make investments in our growing digital economy. Many champions of the open Internet would have preferred a stricter decision. I'm one of them. I myself have real reservations about treating wireless broadband differently from wired broadband. I think the FCC's decision was nevertheless a meaningful step forward. And in a moment I will talk about other people who feel the same. Supporters of the joint resolution fail to acknowledge that the FCC's open Internet rules have received overwhelming support from broadband Internet service providers, consumers and public groups, labor unions, as well as high-tech companies. AT&T CEO Randall Stephenson stated earlier this year that while he wanted, in fact, no regulations, the FCC's open Internet order, he said, ended at a place where we have a line of sight and we know and can commit ourselves to investments. Time Warner Cable stated at the time of the order's release that the rules adopted and they said about that, they appear to reflect a workable balance between protecting consumer interests and preserving incentives for investment and innovation by broadband internet service providers. Numerous analysts from major investment banks have found that the open internet order removes what they call regulatory overhang and allows telecom and cable companies to focus on investment. Google, Facebook, Twitter, eBay, Skype, and other leaders in innovation all urge the FCC to adopt common sense baseline rules, their words, critical to ensuring that the Internet remains a key engine of economic growth, innovation, and global competitiveness. There are more than 150 organizations wrote Congress to oppose this joint resolution. I hate doing this. I hate reading lists. But I'm going to do it anyway. The Communication Workers of America, the AFL-CIO, the NAACP, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the American Library Association, the American Association of Independent Music, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the National Organization for Women, and TechNet. A lot of folks in TechNet that have a lot at stake on this. Mr. President, I have their letters here, and I would ask that they be added to the congressional record at the appropriate place.
Without objection.
To be sure, there are those who disagree with the FCC's open Internet rules. And there is an avenue for these complaints, and it's called the judicial system. Some are using it. 2 companies have filed lawsuits claiming that the FCC went too far. Several public interest groups have filed lawsuits claiming that the FCC did not go far enough. Well, it's their legal right to go to the courts, and when they choose to do that, they can do that. So let's think for a minute what a world would look like without a free and open Internet. In a world without a free and open Internet, consumers and entrepreneurs would have no transparency as to how their broadband provider manages its network, no ability to make informed decisions about their broadband provider. In a world without a free and open Internet, there would be nothing to prevent your broadband provider from steering you only to its preferred websites and services, limiting, therefore, your choice as a consumer. If you are a rural American, broadband Internet access has the power to erase distances and allows you to have the same access to shopping, educational matters, employment opportunities as those living in urban areas. That's a time-honored principle around here. But not if the website that you seek to access is blocked by your Internet provider, your broadband provider. Consumers, entrepreneurs, small businesses need the certainty that they can access lawful websites of their choice when they want, period. In a world without a free and open Internet, there would be nothing to stop broadband providers from blocking access to websites that offer products that compete with those of its affiliates. That happens, Mr. President. In a world without a free and open Internet, companies could pay Internet providers to guarantee their websites open more quickly than their competitors. Now, in a world without a free and open Internet, companies could pay Internet providers to make more sure that their online sales are processed more quickly than their competitors with lower prices. Well, that's not the American way, and that's particularly disturbing in tough times like these. In a world without a free and open Internet, there would be nothing to prevent Internet service providers from charging users a premium in order to guarantee operation in the, quote, fast lane. If you're trying to start a small business, struggling to make ends meet, and cannot afford to pay the toll, you run the risk of being left in the slow lane. That's not good. With inferior Internet service, that's not right. Unable to compete with larger companies, that's very wrong.
And what if you are an innovator or a startup company and you have the next big idea? With broadband, the next big idea does not have to come from the suburban garage or from the Silicon Valley. It can come from rural America. It can come from anywhere. A free and open internet is all that is required to give that big idea a global reach. In a world without a free and open internet, the ability of the next revolutionary idea to reach others, to make it to the greater marketplace, would be entirely dependent on a handful of entrenched broadband gatekeepers and toll collectors. True. Now, I'm not totally opposed to the Congressional Review Act, but I got to say, Mr. President, it's an extraordinarily blunt instrument. It means that all of the rules adopted by the FCC must be overturned at once. This would even mean tossing out common sense provisions about transparency. Do our opponents know this? It would deny the agency the power to protect consumers. Do our opponents know this? What's the sense in all of that? I don't get it. And there's another part that if they take out what you're doing through, if SRES 6 were to pass and they just took these rules out, you couldn't kind of come back and later just have the FCC put them in. You'd have to go through a whole congressional legislative process to reinsert them into the public law, which means many of them would never end up there. I also want to address the argument of supporters of the joint resolution that the FCC's open rules will somehow stifle innovation in the Internet economy. That is just so wrong, I don't know what to say. Over the past 15 years, it is the Internet that has been the greatest engine for the U.S. economy. It leaves everything in its dust, creating more than 3 million jobs, as the senator from Texas indicated. The open Internet rules will help sustain this growth. People have to want to know what the rules of the road are. They want to know what the world is bringing for them. And if they decide that they don't like what's coming, they're going to tell you and they're not going to invest. Very simple. According to Hamilton Consultants, the open Internet ecosystem, which led to the creation of 1.8 million jobs related to applications in e-commerce, and as well 1.2 million jobs related to infrastructure. Moreover, investment and innovation have continued to increase since adoption of the FCC's open Internet rules, not decrease, as the supporters of this resolution will tell you. The facts show that investment in broadband networks increased in the first half of 2011. In fact, investment in networks that support broadband was more than 10% higher in the first half of 2011 than in the first half of 2010. And more of that, investment in Internet companies surged in 2011. And this is after they'd sort of adjusted and taken into account what they saw coming in the way of the rules. There was a $2.3 billion investment going into 275 companies in the second quarter, all of them of this Internet type. That is the most invested in Internet companies in a decade. Plus, shortly after the framework was adopted, America's leading wireless providers announced that they were accelerating their deployment of their advanced fourth generation or 4G networks. It seems that the open Internet rules are giving broadband providers and entrepreneurs and investors the certainty that they need to invest and to create jobs. Certainty is the key. They're not going to invest in what they don't know. We see that in so many other areas. They don't know what's going to happen, so they don't invest. People have all this cash. They don't have certainty. Here they have certainty. They understand that certainty. They understand what's coming, and they like it, and they're investing like never before. The FCC's open Internet rules also, Mr. President, protect small businesses. As estimated, about 20,000 small businesses operate on the Internet. More than 600,000 Americans have part or full-time businesses on eBay alone. I was not aware of that. The FCC's open Internet rules mean that small entrepreneurs will not have to seek permission from broadband providers to reach new markets and consumers with innovative products and services. This is a very important point. It means that small businesses can be located anywhere in this country, including rural America, and through open broadband have the opportunity for their ideas and products and services to have a global reach. That's the point of all of this. And as we all know, small businesses were responsible for nearly 65% of new jobs over the last 15 years. Far from preventing investment, the FCC's open Internet rules will foster small businesses because they trust it, they see it, they see what Moody's is saying about it, they see what the Wall Street investment bankers are saying about it, they see that it's encouraging investment, they like that, they trust that, and so they take risks that they might otherwise not take because they trust. It's not the faceless federal bureaucrat. It's something that is down on paper, and they understand it. They've probably seen it. They've probably commented on it. Maybe some of them didn't like it as much as they should have. Some of them thought it should have been stronger. Some of them thought it should have been weaker, such is life in America. So anyway, I think what they conclude is that what's going on is supporting what they're doing. Finally, I want to note that when it comes to education and privacy and intellectual property, global Internet governance or network security, the government has long provided, and necessarily so, reasonable rules of the road to make possible consumer protection, fair trade, and open markets. The FCC's open Internet rules are no different. They take, as has been quoted by many, a light-touch approach. I like that phrase. And keep the playing field fair. They keep the Internet open and free for consumers, for businesses, for everyone in this country who wants access to broadband Internet. So that is why, Mr. President, I support the FCC open Internet rules, and I encourage my colleagues to vote against the joint resolution.
The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, on our side, I have Senator Wicker and Senator Shelby who've been here waiting, and I'd like to give them 15 minutes for the time from our side. I notice others are here, but they have been waiting for quite a while.
Is that 15 minutes each or 15 minutes together?
Up to 5 minutes for Senator Wicker and up to 10 minutes for Senator Shelby.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President, what would be the order after that?
There is no order after that.
Mr. President, I've asked that I be recognized for the time that I have. I think it's about 15 minutes after that.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered, and the gentleman from the senator from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise today as a co-sponsor and strong supporter of this resolution of disapproval. Once again, we're witnessing a government regulation that we do not need. There is a reason that when we talk about today's economy, we talk about the cost of government overreach. Unnecessary regulations put a wet blanket on job creation, and they work against getting our economy back on track. This is a perfect example of the government standing in the way of growth and investment. The Internet and its associated applications should be allowed to develop without excessive FCC red tape. The Internet owes a great deal of its rapid success to innovators and entrepreneurs who had the freedom to imagine, to explore, and to create. With the FCC acting as a traffic cop, this freedom will be compromised. The subjective rules of the road, as laid out by the FCC, are a prescription for uncertainty within the industry. By handing over more power to a government agency, net neutrality rules slam the brakes on potential investment and new innovation. The ideas that should make our Internet faster, more secure, and better for consumers fall by the wayside. At the end of the day, the American consumer would suffer. The broadband marketplace would simply offer fewer services, fewer devices, and less content to paying customers. The FCC order reads that the Internet shall not block lawful content, applications, services, or non-harmful devices subject to reasonable network management. It goes on to say that providers shall not unreasonably discriminate in transmitting lawful network traffic over a consumer's broadband Internet access server. But the terms lawful and reasonable are not easily defined. Under the order, what is lawful and what is reasonable would be determined by unelected bureaucrats. The FCC would rule as a de facto police of the open and free Internet. The FCC would be the final arbiter of what broadband service providers can and cannot do. Its judgments, not the market or the consumer, would determine how networks would be managed. The FCC is claiming to have an authority that the American public did not grant it. The hands of the Internet service providers will be tied when the FCC has this kind of power. Without being able to run their own networks, service providers cannot maximize the online experience for the vast majority of their customers. They are, in essence, prevented from doing what they were established to do. Equally troubling is that the Commission's order is trying to fix a problem that does not exist. Today's consumers have greater access to more Internet services than ever before. Where is the problem? Businesses have invested tens of billions of dollars in new broadband infrastructure. Internet entrepreneurs continue to offer new services to broadband users. There's no economic justification for this unprecedented intrusion into the marketplace. Policy should benefit the public, and these FCC rules do not. In conclusion, Mr. President, we've seen this movie before with regulation where regulation is not needed. Again here, we have a regulatory recipe that would produce far-reaching and damaging effects. The current landscape has allowed the Internet to grow exponentially. It is a free market of competition, productivity, and growth. The FCC's regulatory intrusion is completely unwarranted. And I yield back.
Mr. President, the senior senator from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. President, I think a lot of people probably mean well, but often misguided when they say we're going to regulate this sector of the economy, we're going to regulate this and that. But the market, Mr. President, as you well know, the market is the driving force in our economy, not just in the United States, but worldwide. It is going to be the market that will decide what we do as far as job creation for our people everywhere. And the Internet, as an example, I believe, of gosh, let's don't overregulate it. Let it grow. Let it do its job, and it will. I associate myself with the remarks of the senator from Mississippi and also the senator from Texas. Mr. President, I also like to speak about some common sense steps that Congress can take right now to help our struggling economy. At a time when job growth is stagnant, Congress needs to lift the regulatory burden that is stifling capital formation. The Senate has before it several bills that would help private businesses raise the capital that they need to grow and to create jobs. This is an issue, Mr. President, that should enjoy the support of both Republicans and Democrats here in the Senate. Access to capital, as the presiding officer well knows, is what allows entrepreneurs to transfer new ideas into living companies. Novel products, new services, and most importantly, good jobs can be created. Unfortunately, overregulation has made it progressively harder for small businesses to access capital in this country. I'll give you some statistics. They're clear. In the 1990s, an average of 547 initial public offerings took place each year, compared, Mr. President, with an average of just 192 per year after 1999. Small initial public offerings now make up only 20% of the total. In contrast, they made up, Mr. President, 80% of the total in the 90s when we were creating so many small jobs. In addition, the number of new businesses being launched each year is failing. In 2010, it was the lowest it's been since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started tracking the number in 1994. The SEC has been slow to address these problems, even though it has the authority to do so. The chairman of the SEC has spoken of the need for action, but we've not seen tangible results yet. A year ago, one SEC commissioner remarked, and I quote, "My hope is that as an agency, the Commission will move beyond talking about small business capital formation and will take concrete steps that actually foster it." Mr. President, I believe we, the Senate and the American people, can no longer wait for the SEC to do its job. The time has come for Congress to take action. Our economy cannot afford to wait any longer. The first thing I believe we should do to improve capital formation is to bring up for consideration several bipartisan bills that would implement important regulatory reforms. One bill would modernize the SEC's Regulation A, which was initially designed to make it easy for small businesses to access our capital markets. Unfortunately, Regulation A is outdated and rarely used. Another set of bills would raise the thresholds for reporting so that small banks and small companies are not subject to burdensome SEC reporting requirements. These bills would still leave investors protected and ensure that public companies provide meaningful disclosure. Most importantly, investors would still be protected by the SEC's anti-fraud rules. These bills, these bipartisan bills I'm speaking of, represent a few steps that we can take right now, but they're not comprehensive by any means. Much more needs to be done to make sure registration requirements are tailored to the size and the type of businesses. The existing one-size-fits-all approach means that small companies have to bear the same costs that large companies do when they go public. These inequities need to be addressed. It stifles job creation. One would think that we could agree here in the Senate on removing unnecessary restrictions on capital formation. Yet for the past 3 years, the majority party has dramatically increased government involvement in the economy. They have imposed one costly mandate after another on businesses. They've crowded out the private sector with massive government programs, resulting in persistently high unemployment and stagnant economic growth. Mr. President, basically, I think it's time for a new approach. It's time to revitalize the free markets in America. We can begin this effort by taking these small steps to help entrepreneurs find the capital that they need to build their businesses and to create jobs. I hope that my Democratic colleagues will now do more than talk, and that we can work on a bipartisan basis these bills that have bipartisan sponsorship to create jobs and join us here. Thank you, Mr. President.